we're continuing looking on the different models for performance evaluation. And really, the next group is called the result approach as you go through. And there's three different types of them. A lot of times we're using what we call a combination of management by objectives, or MBO is a terminology. And management by objectives, as you go through, you typically, on an MBO evaluation, you take the top 10 duties, and then you have 2 or 3 organizational goals that you tie into. And these goals are talked about between the supervisor and the employee before they're implemented as you go through. And there's agreement as to what they are in the process. You also have this thing called SMART goals, and I'll talk about those in just a minute by the time it's all done. So we want to sit down, and the SMART goals, they're specific and measurable, but there's 5 components I want to cover as to exactly what they are. The common components, the SMART goals, and we have different types of measurements can be used for goals or objectives as you go through. It depends what they are. So this is a more flexible approach than actually a canned approach, so to speak, as you go through. And you sit down and have the manager and the subordinates participate. So we're diving now into more of a written descriptive narrative evaluation rather than a canned evaluation where this is a 5, you're a 5 over here, and a 4 here, and a 3 here. So there's more dialogue taking place as well as written dialogue and narrative as you go through. On SMART goals, here's the 5 points in the SMART goal. It's specific, it's measurable. Those are really the 2 main points, but here they're also attainable as you go through. If you've been having growth as a company of 3 to 5% annually, and you all of a sudden want to have a 20% growth rate and have the employee do that, that's ridiculous in the process and everything else, but sometimes it happens. It's not attainable, not realistic, and there's a high probability the employee will fail. And by the way, the supervisor needs to take ownership of that as well in the process, because the supervisor is failing by giving them unrealistic different goals to achieve in the process. And then relevant, timely, S-M-A-R-T spells SMART, so we call them SMART goals. Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant to the organization, and timely as you go through. Now we're using SMART goals and really objectives to sit down and evaluate employees. It's really the best practice in goal setting. They discuss and set no more than 3 to 5 goals. And by the way, if you start going past 5 goals for an employee, that almost is unattainable in the process. I saw a college president one time, and we did 20 great objectives as you go through. Well, one of them was, let's change the college logo from gold to white. Whoa, what a tough one. That is about that shallow of a goal as you go through. So it's one of these things of stop doing shallow goals. If you want to sit down and have a serious goal in an organization, you have to sit down and only have a few and dive deep and make certain you're making a significant change throughout the organization with the goal, rather than a bunch of superficial little cutesy stuff and everything else to put in your resume to make you look really cool. So dive in and do the same with your employees as you go through from top down. Make certain you're giving them achievable goals they can really focus in, sink their teeth into, so to speak, as they go through, and really help your organization thrive and grow forward. Goals should be brief, meaningful, challenging. The time frame should be related to what's expected to be accomplished. There should be a relation between the goals and the rewards. A lot of times rewards are compensation as you go through, and the goals should be linked up, talked to, rather than just get it done, you must do it this way in the process as you go through. So really, when we talk about the result approach, there's also a balanced scorecard where you start taking the different parts of the performance and categorizing them. You can see over here that we're leaving the whole concept of having a set 5 points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this point. 1, 2, 3. We're really diving more into the narratives. We're keeping up that aspect of having a written narrative out there. Talk about the financial part, the customer part, which is measurable by relationships, which is not economic necessarily. It becomes economic, financial, but the relationship, the internal or operations, and the learning and growth of the employee, which is included here in the process, and it becomes more significant to the employee and supervisor because you're preparing them as you go through. So the balanced scorecard does multiple things that are non-numerical. You're talking about people, building relationships, looking long-term, and tying more into how you're going to help the corporation to grow in the process. This one over here, it's a little bit long. Productivity measurement and evaluation system as you go through. So ProMES as you go through, and it really is very similar to this one back here as a balanced scorecard, because you're identifying activities or objectives that you hope to accomplish, and you have indicators of the product as you go through, and you want to have a really good feedback system. All these areas, they're very good because it forces you to have dialogue that's quantifiable and different kind of reports. It goes into the personnel file, but when you pull out the personnel file 4 years later, you're going back, you're seeing a document on an evaluation. The evaluation can be 5 or 6 pages long for each year you go through. If you're serious as an organization, that certainly makes an awful lot of sense. But for those people that just want to go whip through and say, oh, you got an overall, what's your bottom line? Oh, you got a 4 on this last year. This year you got a 3. It's not so simple as you go through, because this requires you to be an engaged employer. And by the way, a lot of employers don't really care about being engaged as you go through. They just want a bottom line is, are you a 3, 4, or 5 employee? And that's where you have a different types of philosophy in the organization. This series over here really dives into a dialogue and connecting different aspects as you go through. Sometimes you have a graph like this in there as you're going through and looking on the different aspects as to really identifying what the employee has accomplished. It minimizes the subjectivity, and really it links the organization's strategies and goals right to the individual employee as you go through. And it really is very good. But the challenge is it can be contaminated and deficit. You may ignore this facet that the employee is doing here because you're not evaluating that, you're kind of ignoring the process. You may ignore parts of the job description as you go through. And sometimes the narrative will dive off into a whole different realm in the process over here that's got nothing to do with the actual performance. So the challenges, you can be contaminated and a deficit as you go through. Now, this one here, we call it the quality approach. Once again, customer orientation. You want a prevention approach to errors, continuous improvement. The primary goal is improving customer satisfaction. It really focuses in on data as you go through. There's only one type here, and we really talk about having subjective feedback from managers, peers, and customers about personal qualities. This dives real heavily, and you have to create a unique evaluation form for each and every single person. And then you have to sit down there and try to sit down and quantify it by gathering data as you go through. Here are some of the examples: process flow charts, cause and effect diagrams, Pareto charts as you go through. And our Pareto charts sits down and deals with 80-20 processes as you go through. The book has more talk about that. You have control charts, different kinds of histograms as you go through, and scattergrams. If you haven't used any one of these types of charts in the process or different diagrams, I encourage you to look at the examples in the text, but also they really come in handy. I've used scattergrams multiple times for different types of evaluations, not just on employees, but also on long-term projects as they go out into the future as you go through. Here's an internal promotional chart, and if you really started tracking the data on this as you go through, there's a process that I've used, and you've heard of, called TQM, Total Quality Management. We've used this as you go through, but look on the side over here, reasons given for not selecting current employees. None of these look very good. The transfer time took too long. That sounds like an internal organizational problem rather than an employee problem. So here you have 60 times cited as an issue, and because the transfer time took too long, those employees that were didn't get to be moved up because of this, they're really victims of an organization that can't really handle in promoting from within, which is really a challenge. And you better pay attention as an organization. What's going on is lack of timing. What does lack of timing mean for a promotion? Is it easier just to post a job and hire somebody from the outside rather than develop somebody from within? That's a problem organizationally as well. The manager discretion, who knows what that means? The preferred outside candidate, why? Are the internal candidates full of warts and things you want to promote them on the inside? Just guess what? Those outside candidates, they have warts too in the process. You just don't see them. Nobody says, hey, I really have a lot of problems. I have a problem with my mouth. I have a problem over here. I don't get along with people very well. They don't tell you those things in the interviews, but you may sit down and look at the internal candidate, know that those could be some challenges, but they're working on them. And here this candidate comes in, they're shining like a star until 3 months later, you realize that, gee, they got a lot of personal issues to deal with. Yeah, that happens over there. To prefer an outside candidate means sometimes you're really smitten by, oh, somebody from the outside is going to save us. No, usually not really. They're just like a normal person. A lack of a development plan to encourage the development of an employee. All 5 of these are pretty bad if you start reading these things. So you should be paying attention to how you're going through the process. This is a control chart. You can see over here that somebody really got on the ball in the 3rd quarter of 2014. Look at the difference they had as to the percentage hired internally as you go through. Somebody was paying attention in the process. Quality control should apply to everything. Whenever you have the opportunity to actually quantify performance evaluations and also see if people are being developed to move up in the organization, you should do it. I know this is just one corner of this because we're talking about one of a different type of evaluations, a very narrative one with a lot of written descriptions, but really this is excellent in development. It takes a lot of time to evaluate somebody using this method, and the employee will do a lot of evaluation of their own. But really, the more data you can use on evaluations, the better off and the more structure your organization will have. So remember this, these are 4 and 5 out of the total that we're looking at. So the results approaches has 3 different ways: use of objectives, a balanced scorecard, and a productivity measurement evaluation system, and also this quality approach, which really is a customer orientation and a data-driven orientation as well in the process. Take care.